I have to be honest. I read the abstract of this paper 3 times because I was convinced I was missing a knot somewhere in the text.
Yeah, I had the exact same reaction. It feels like a typo at first glance.
Right. Because usually when we get these research stacks on longevity or biohacking, the formula is so predictable. It's always, do more discipline.
More consistency, specific superfoods, keep the machine humming.
Exactly. Keep the line flat and healthy. But this paper, wait, I shouldn't say paper. This biophysical roadmap we're looking at today suggests that the first step to truly resetting your biological clock is to sit on the couch and overeat.
I mean, it sounds like the kind of advice you'd get from a late-night infomercial selling a magic pill, but this is actually one of the most rigorous, albeit radical, papers we've looked at in a long time.
So for everyone listening, welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping into a fascinating piece of literature titled Oscillatory Hormesis, the Stagnant Starvation Building Protocol.
Also known as the SSB protocol, authored by Inkamgalan Nasanjargal.
And the mission of this deep dive really is to dismantle the idea that stability is synonymous with health. The author argues that chronic maintenance, the daily jog, the salad for lunch, eventually just hits a wall.
He calls it the hormetic ceiling. And to understand why that ceiling exists, why your healthy lifestyle stops working, we actually have to look at physics, not just biology.
Which is where the paper dives into the thermodynamic uncertainty relation. Now, usually when I see physics terms in a biology paper, I get a little nervous.
Sure, it can be dense.
But the concept here is actually about cost, right?
It's entirely about the cost of precision. Think about it this way. For your body to repair itself, to fix a strand of DNA or clean out a damaged cell, it requires energy.
Right.
And that energy expenditure creates waste, heat, metabolic trash. The thermodynamic uncertainty relation, or TUR, essentially dictates that there is a fundamental limit to how precise your body can be without generating excessive heat and disorder.
So the very act of fixing the body actually generates more entropy.
Inevitably, you can't escape the physics of it. Over time, that background noise, what the paper calls accumulated entropy generation, it gets so loud that your cells can't hear the repair signals anymore.
It creates an information bottleneck.
Exactly. Your body wants to fix itself, the repair crew is ready and willing, but the signal is just lost in the static.
So if I'm understanding the core thesis here, simply maintaining a healthy lifestyle isn't enough to break through that static because it's just a low-level hum.
That's the core argument. The paper suggests that to break through that informational floor, you don't need a steady hum. You need a scream.
A high-amplitude signal.
Right. You need a signal so loud, it forces the entire system to pay attention and reorganize.
And to produce that scream, we have to stop whispering. Which leads us to the theory section of the protocol. If the problem is noise and entropy, the paper identifies a very specific enemy that is generating most of that noise.
Senescent cells.
The zombie cells.
Yeah, we've touched on them in previous deep dives. These are cells that have reached the end of their lifespan, they've stopped dividing, but they refuse to die. They just sit in your tissues.
Spewing out inflammatory chemicals.
Exactly. And the paper describes them as having a Warburg-like state.
Now, usually we hear about the Warburg effect in the context of cancer. Why is it being applied to aging here?
Because the metabolic behavior is strikingly similar. These zombie cells become metabolically rigid, they get addicted to sugar, glycolysis.
It is gorge on it.
They do. They focus entirely on building biomass and protecting themselves rather than being efficient. They completely lose the ability to burn fat or switch fuels.
There's a diagram in the source material figure 1 that really clarified this for me. It contrasts a plastic cell with a rigid cell.
That visualization is key to this whole protocol. A healthy cell is plastic. It's flexible. If you run out of sugar, it seamlessly switches to fat. If oxygen is low, it adapts. It has high NAD plus integrity.
But the senescent cell is locked in.
Completely locked in. The paper uses the term epitranscriptomic rigidity,
which implies they've essentially welded the door shut.
That is a great way to picture it. Their genes are chemically locked, specifically through hypermethylation driven by a protein called MATL3. They physically cannot switch fuel sources.
Wow.
They are 100% dependent on a steady stream of sugar and glutamine. In fact, they rely on these things called glutaminase filaments just to survive.
And that rigidity is their ultimate weakness, isn't it? If they can't adapt, they're vulnerable.
If you know how to exploit it, yes. And that brings us to the trap hypothesis, which is central to this entire paper.
Right, because most longevity protocols try to attack these cells immediately. You take supplements called Senolytics and try to bomb them out.
But this protocol says no, that's too crude. First, you have to make them feel safe. You have to bait the trap.
Which brings us to phase N, the stagnant phase, or in the paper scientific terms, anabolic sensitization. And this is the part that I think you, the listener, and honestly most health-conscious people will struggle with emotionally.
Oh, it is psychologically brutal if you are used to being active.
It's 21 to 28 days of being completely sedentary and eating ad libitum, essentially eating whatever you want as much as you want.
But biologically, it's a highly strategic maneuver. You are intentionally inducing exposure-related malnutrition, ERM. You are overfeeding to the point where your body just stops repairing itself and focuses entirely on growth.
We are purposefully turning off our own defense systems.
We are powering them down. You are downregulating pathways like NRF2 and FOXO3. Those are your body's stress shields. You are suppressing autophagy, the cleaning crew. You are basically letting the garbage pile up in the streets.
That sounds incredibly dangerous. Why would anyone take that risk?
To lull the zombies into a coma of comfort. When you flood the system with nutrients, you cause something called substrate inhibition. You overload enzymes like IDO.
So the senescent cells just gorge themselves.
Exactly. They get fat, happy, and even more rigid. They think the war is over. They commit full of that high-energy, sugar-burning state.
They become completely complacent.
And we can actually track this. The paper mentions a specific biomarker you can look at, the GDF-15 awakening response.
Right, GDF-15. What exactly are we looking for there?
So in a healthy, appropriately stressed body, GDF-15 spikes in the morning. It's a sign of normal mitochondrial stress. But if you do phase I correctly, if you've truly sedated your system, that line goes flat.
Why?
A flat GDF-15 means your cells have taken the bait. They are entirely unprepared for what comes next.
Okay, so we've spent a month making ourselves soft, suppressing our defenses, and feeding the zombies until they are bloated and dependent. Then comes phase 2,
The starvation phase.
or the bioenergetic purge.
And this is where the hammer drops. It has to be sudden. We're talking 72 to 120 hours, 3 to 5 days. You go from eating whatever you want to absolutely 0 calories, complete cessation of food.
But it's not just fasting, is it? Because fasting alone wouldn't be enough of a shock. The protocol calls for extreme high stress during this fast. HIIT workouts, thermal shock-like saunas, and ice baths.
This is the oscillatory hormesis in action. You are creating the maximum possible differential between your baseline, which was super low and comfortable, and your peak stress.
Let's look at the cellular level. What happens when you flip that switch so violently?
It's a tale of two cities. The healthy cells, the plastic ones, they immediately engage shielding. They sense the sugar is gone, so they rapidly switch to ketogenesis. They start burning fat.
They adapt.
Right. They upregulate autophagy to recycle their own damaged parts for energy. They hunker down and weather the storm.
And the zombies, we established they physically cannot switch fuels.
They go bankrupt. Remember, we spent a month trapping them in a sugar-burning state. They cannot burn fat. So when you cut the sugar and simultaneously scream at the body to perform high-intensity work, they hit a massive energy crisis.
High demand, zero supply.
Exactly. They starve to death. Rapidly.
The paper details a really specific mechanism for this involving an enzyme called hexokinase 2, or HK2.
Yes. Usually this HK2 enzyme binds to the mitochondria to protect the cell from dying. It acts like a shield. But the acute energy crisis knocks it loose. Their shields physically go down.
And because we're working out so intensely during this phase, we're creating metabolic waste that they can't clear, right?
Their waste disposal system, specifically the VAT phase, gets completely overwhelmed. They literally choke on their own trash. It triggers selective apoptosis. They die simply because they are too rigid to change.
There was one detail in phase 2 that felt straight out of a sci-fi novel to me. The mention of hyperbaric pressure.
That's the cherry on top. The paper suggests that changes in atmospheric pressure, like being at high altitude or using a hypobaric pressure chamber, can actually help burst these stress cells physically.
Literally burst them. Like a balloon.
Biochemically, yes. It activates a pathway that cleaves a protein called AMP2. It's exactly like popping a balloon that's already overinflated. It ensures the lysis, the breaking down of those senescent populations that are already teetering on the edge of death.
That is brutal. It's cellular warfare.
It is.
So phase I was the lure. Phase 2 is the trap springing shut. But now we have a body that is stressed, starved, and full of cellular debris. We can't just stay there.
No, staying in phase 2 would eventually kill the healthy cells too. You have to pivot to phase 3, the building phase.
For the regenerative rebound. This lasts about 14 to 21 days, and it starts with refeeding. But the paper is very specific about what triggers the growth. It's not just eating a pizza.
It's leucine. The amino acid leucine is the primary trigger for mTORC1, which is the master switch for growth in the body. But here is the critical nuance. We aren't just trying to bulk up muscle mass. We are trying to trigger symmetric stem cell division.
Okay, let's unpack that, because I remember stem cells from basic biology. But what is the difference between symmetric and asymmetric division here? Why does it matter?
It matters a lot. Usually when a stem cell divides to repair tissue, say after a regular workout, it does so asymmetrically. One stem cell creates one differentiated cell, like a new skin cell or a muscle cell, and keeps one stem cell. It's a patch job.
It maintains the status quo. It just fills the hole.
Right. But here, because we cleared out so much empty space in phase 2, because we actually killed off the old, rigid cells, the body is desperate to refill those niches. It switches into a high-fidelity expansion mode.
Meaning symmetric division.
Yes. Symmetric division means one stem cell splits into 2 brand new stem cells.
It's restocking the reserve entirely.
And it's doing it cleanly. The source claims this type of division reduces mutation accumulation by tenfold. You aren't just making a photocopy of a photocopy. You are printing a fresh original. You are repopulating the tissue with fresh, young cells.
The paper uses a really interesting term for this entire process, veno-like monitoring. It implies we aren't just fixing physical tissue, we're fixing information.
That goes right back to the entropy problem we started with, the information bottleneck. The idea here is epigenetic resonance. These massive metabolic oscillations, feast, famine, feast, they force the genome to synchronize. It resets the biological clock.
It essentially suppresses that noise floor.
It clears the static completely. By forcing the body to adapt to massive extremes, you remind it how to function at its highest capacity. You restore the signal clarity.
It's incredible to think about, but I want to ground this for the listener, because this relies heavily on the math of the signal. The paper actually provides a formula for signal-to-noise ratio.
It does. It calculates the SNR in decibels, which is fascinating for a biology paper. But the variable that matters most in that formula is the delta.
The difference between the bottom of the valley and the top of the peak.
Exactly.
And this explains why phase I is so necessary. I was skeptical about the overeating part, but mathematically it makes perfect sense.
It's essential physics. Think about it. If you just did the starvation and the HIA workouts while living your normal, healthy, balanced life, the stress spike is meh. It's a hill, not a mountain.
Right.
But by artificially lowering your baseline, by making yourself soft and sedentary first, you dig a massive trench.
So you climb out of the trench. The mountain feels Everest-sized to your biology.
That's the contrast principle. You trick the body into thinking the environment has changed so drastically that it absolutely must reorganize the entire system. It shifts from homeostatic plateauing, just trying to stay the same, to a massive adaptive regenerative response.
It forces a hard reset. But we have to acknowledge this is high risk, high reward. And speaking of risk, you cannot fly this blind. You can't just guess if you're starving enough or trapped enough.
No, absolutely not. The paper outlines a very strict biomarker dashboard. If you're going to try this, you need data to navigate the volatility. We call it precision volatility.
So what are the non-negotiables here? What are we tracking if we attempt this?
First, during the purge phase 2, you track the GKI, or glucose ketone index. You are targeting a specific zone between 1 and 3.
That is deep ketosis.
Very deep. Most people on a standard keto diet hang out around a 5 or 6. But if you're at a 5, you haven't switched fuels hard enough to kill the zombies. You need that profound metabolic switch to starve them out.
And what about tracking the heart?
You look at HRV, heart rate variability, specifically the RMSSD metric. This measures the adaptability of your autonomic nervous system.
What's the pattern we're looking for across the phases?
You want to see it absolutely tank during phase 2. You want to see the stress manifesting. If your HRV stays high during the starvation phase, you aren't pushing hard enough. The purge isn't working.
But then it comes back up.
Yes. In phase 3, you need to see a massive rebound. That rebound is the definitive proof that your nervous system still has plasticity. If it stays low after you start eating again, you've just damaged yourself.
There was one more marker mentioned that caught my eye. TGA sting.
Ah, yes. That's the cellular pathway that drives inflammation when cells leak DNA into their own cytoplasm. It's a major driver of what we call inflammaging.
So the protocol aims to silence this.
Exactly. If you execute the SSB protocol correctly, you should come out the other side in phase 3 with a baseline inflammation that is structurally lower than when you started phase 1.
So let's zoom out for a second. What does this all mean for us? We've walked through the trap, the purge, and the rebuild. It's a wild ride, and it's a radical departure from the standard advice of moderation in all things.
It challenges the fundamental philosophy of modern health. If you look at human history, biology didn't evolve in a climate-controlled gym with 3 square, balanced meals a day.
Right. We weren't optimizing our macros year-round.
We evolved in extreme volatility. Glaciers, droughts, hunting mammoths, surviving on berries, feast and absolute famine. Our biology is fundamentally designed to oscillate.
And by trying to keep the line flat today, by constantly seeking comfort, safety, and a steady routine, we might be causing the very entropy we're trying to avoid.
Exactly. By trying to keep the line flat, we lose dissipative control. We lose the ability to clean up the mess because we never heat the furnace hot enough to burn it off. The zombie cells, the primary agents of aging, they are the ones that crave stability. They can't handle the change.
So the quote from the paper, to stay young, you have to be volatile.
You have to be able to handle the extremes. To stay young, you literally have to be the thing that changes.
That is a powerful takeaway. The path to rejuvenation isn't a steady jog. It's a roller coaster that you deliberately build yourself.
Well put.
I'm left thinking about one thing, though, as we wrap up. If this protocol relies on trapping cells by making them comfortable and overfed, how many of us are living in phase I permanently without ever triggering phase 2?
That is the scary question, isn't it? If you do phase I without phase 2, you aren't rejuvenating anything. You're just accelerating the decay. You're just feeding the zombies.
And on that slightly terrifying note, we'll leave you to digest or perhaps to fast. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into oscillatory hormesis. It's definitely given me a completely new perspective on the biological cost of comfort.
It's all about the contrast.
See you next time.